Hi, friends. Today, I want to share with you a bit about my story and how I came to living a life that was more focused on connection rather than the traditional versions of success and purpose and what matters in life. My values changed and I got really clear about who I was and what mattered to me. So I want to share that story because I believe it's deeply connected to why I'm so passionate about this thing that is the connected way and about helping individuals and helping hopefully affect global change. And I also realize that some of you can probably relate. And so sharing my journey may help you. So, story time. So I grew up in Massachusetts with a lot of privilege, and I want to be clear about that because I'm aware that this story is one of privilege, and this story may not resonate for a lot of people that have not had the privilege that I had. I just want that to be very clear from the beginning. So, all right. So I grew up in Massachusetts, and I grew up in a culture, in a family, in a situation where achievement was really important. It was also what became very important for me for many reasons. So from the beginning, as soon as I hit school, probably, I was incredibly focused on achieving, and I was a perfectionist in many ways. I was also what I now call an excellentist, which means that I wanted to be the best at everything. I wanted to be the best student. I wanted to be the best athlete. I wanted to be the fastest runner. I wanted to be the captain of the teams. I wanted to excel. And that was my goal, was to excel. And so I checked the boxes, get on to the varsity teams, do the best in school, grade SATs, get to a good college, become a leader in college, get really involved, get the great degree, get the great job, all the things. And so I was both checking boxes of achievement in terms of societal expectations of what makes us good and what makes us worthy. And I was also desperately seeking to experience worthiness. And so I thought I could find that in achieving things. I thought that if I checked enough boxes and got to the end goal, that I would be happy, that I would feel worthy, that I would feel like I was enough, that I would feel good enough. And that was because I had this inherent belief within me that I was not good enough and that I needed to do things in order to be good enough. And that's an important part because that changed over time. Well, it's still changing. So I kept checking boxes. I kept doing the things, and I got a great job that was really cool. So a lot of people saw me and I was being recognized for what I was doing. I got promoted and I got promoted again. I was climbing the ladder. I was helping set up a marketing agency, growing that. I was getting great clients. I was having great client relationships. People really liked working with me. I had a team under me. A lot of them really liked working with me. And so I had all these inputs telling me, you're doing great, you're doing great, you're doing great. I had great friends. I was living in Colorado. I had all these things that I thought I wanted and needed, and great relationship. And I was miserable. And I was just so lost, and it felt like, how could I possibly be miserable when I have all these things and I've checked all these boxes and I'm doing all the things and everything is lining up the way that it's supposed to, and yet why isn't this working? Why am I not feeling good? And so I thought, okay, let me change some of the circumstances because maybe that's the problem, which it's not, I promise you. It's like putting a Band-Aid on an infected wound. And so I actually decided, instead of just changing one thing, why not change it all? So I moved back to New England. I got a new job. I left the relationship that I was in. Everything changed. And I was like, okay, maybe this will fix it. The opposite happened. I was so miserable. I did exchange one toxic work environment for another, but that wasn't all of the problem. It was not everything that was going on. And I was crying every day. I was depressed. I was sick a lot. My body was basically shutting down and telling me to slow down and take care of myself, and I couldn't. And I was absolutely miserable. I was in the worst state that I had ever been in. Really confused, sort of disoriented, and scared of things I had never been scared of before. And it was clear that I was not okay. There had been something inside of me that I had never heard telling me like something's wrong, something's off. And it was my intuition. I know now, but it had even spoken to me about this job. Don't take this job. This is something's really off about this, and I didn't listen. And so, but I had never had these that I knew of. I had never had these like moments of guidance, or I had sort of plowed through them and kept going. And so eventually I had a really, really bad week. There were things that happened to my family. There were things that happened to me. There were things happening at work, and I was really sick, and things then really came to a head. And the guidance that came through was that I had to stop. I had to stop. And I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a new job. I didn't have something to go to. I didn't have my next move lined up. And that totally freaked out my mind. It really freaked out most of me. And yet there was still this part of me saying, you have to stop. You have to just stop. You have to just quit your job and stop. And it was very clear, but it was a new thing for me to listen to this part of me rather than logic. And so I finally surrendered to that guidance and said, okay, and I quit my job without a plan and was kind of at a loss. And at first I really thought I was just burnt out, that I was like physically and emotionally and professionally burnt out, that I was in the wrong job, that I was doing the wrong thing, and okay, what do I want? And in that process of starting to question that, I really still had no answers. And so I felt like I just needed more time at first to recover, but then over time it became more, something else is going on here, I just need more time. And this is when I started having magical experiences, for lack of a better term. I started having spiritual experiences where I was being provided for in very unexpected ways that I never could have imagined or conjured. And this is when I started to wonder, is something else going on here? Both, is something else going on here within me, but also like, am I being cared for by something that I cannot see or understand? And so that moment of surrender, of letting go, of listening to this internal guidance that was very quiet at the time, but then over time, the more I trusted it, the more I realized like, oh, something's going on here, the more connected I felt. And it was very clear to me that it was not just me doing this. It was not just me in this world. And somehow by surrendering and letting go of control, things started to come up and started to show up for me. And show up they did. So my path continued, and that I ended up taking an entire year off really unexpectedly, really unplanned, and only because I had these divinely guided interventions and opportunities present themselves that allowed me to have that time. And I worked at a holistic retreat center for 8 months in exchange for room and board and for learning. And during that time, I explored my intuition, I explored spirituality, and I did a lot of deep inquiry about who I was and what mattered to me. But in the process of all of that, what happened is that I began to live a life that was more connected to something greater than me. At the time, I called it spirit. I still call it spirit sometimes. And I started to explore different things that were related to that. Like, okay, what, spiritual practices do people do? How do people connect in this way? And in the midst of that year, one of the incredible and completely not logical divine interventions that happened was that I came across Martha Beck. That's a very long story, but a really interesting one, and I'll share it sometime. But the point is that I came across her and her work. I later became a coach with her. But in terms of my experience with her and what that created, is that her teachings were about us having two selves. This was her focus at the time, that we had an essential self and we had a social self. The essential self is who we're born to be. This is what I now call my soul self or my connected self. Soul self, essential self. And then we have a social self. The social self usually shows up, I think she says, between like 5 and 7. It's the part of us that tries to fit in the world. We go to school, we start building community. It's the part of us that allows us to stay safe by keeping us connected to other people, by living in community, by being able to relate to people. And it's also the part of us that then achieves, does things. To me, it's the ego self. It's the part of us that is living in this human world and is the human part of us. It's often in our mind. And our soul self is separate, it's the part of us that is connected spiritually to something greater than us. And what she explained and then was like, oh my gosh, this is explaining exactly what's going on with me. And I don't feel crazy for the first time in a long time, was that the social self, for many, many, many reasons, can take over and can run the show. Basically, the social self overdevelops. And so the ego self overdevelops. And what happens as a result of that is that there's a complete imbalance. And my exploration of this has expanded deeply past what Martha teaches about the essential self and the social self. I've found this in so many different spiritual teachings and so many different traditions. Different teachers talk about this concept. And it became the basis of my life. It became this powerful understanding of, oh, okay, this is who I'm trying to get to know. This essential self is who I'm trying to get to know. Because over that year, actually pretty quickly before I even met Martha, I had realized I have no idea what I want to do. Because I don't know who I am. I have no idea who I am. I've been doing all the things, and everything that I've been doing is because I'm good at it or because I could do it. But I don't know what I want to be doing. And so how do I figure out who I actually am? Because I left that like really early, probably 5 or 6. And so again, the social self develops, and for whatever reason, it decides you need to be safe. And so I'm going to take over this show and protect you and make sure that you are safe in this life. And in reality, the ego self is not something to be demonized. And at first I was really upset with this part of me that had taken over. And that's not the point. It takes over for a multitude of reasons. And so if you've experienced this, do not demonize that part of yourself. It absolutely is doing it for a reason, but it will take off. It will take over and it will drive the bus. And in my mind, it's the driver because it's how we show up in this world, but it's meant to be given directions and destinations by our soul selves. The ego is driving and the soul is the passenger that is a very valued passenger. It's almost like the ego self is the chauffeur and the soul self is supposed to say where to go. But sometimes because the ego self, runs rampant and goes rogue and starts driving around, and there's lots of road rage on the road. So that is what had happened to me. And so I then embarked on this deep journey not necessarily like intentionally in exactly this format, but this deep journey of getting to know my soul self and connecting with that part of me and figuring out what energized that part of me. What did that part of me love to do? What did that part of me want? What did that part of me value? And what that part of me values most, it turns out, is connection. And what that part of me wants most is connection. And so since then, for the past 12 or 13 years, I've been on that journey of living in connection with that part of me. What that means is that I have been guided and called to explore spirituality and, okay, what am I connected to? It additionally means that I have found a way in my own life that connecting spiritually, connecting to something greater than me, connecting to the idea that I am not completely in control, which is terrifying for our ego selves, but releasing into that soul self who is actually living in partnership with spiritual energy, with divine energy, with something greater than us, has been both magical because it has guided me to things that I never, ever could have imagined. It's guided the path of my work, becoming a coach, and then eventually becoming a minister, both of which I never could have made up originally. It's gifted me with the responsibility of holding this concept of the connected way. And it's a constant practice. It's a practice of reminding myself, okay, this is what matters to me. Connection is what matters to me. Yes, I live in a society that values money and power. That is the currency of the ego. But connection is the currency of the soul. And I found that in myself. I have also seen that in countless clients and people that I've interacted with who either I have helped to get more connected to their soul selves, to their essential energy, and to what is really deeply true for them, but also in other people who are living in connection with that connection is what matters. Connection to self, deep connection with other people, connection to something greater than us, connection to the land, the truth that we are all connected to one another, that we are all equally valuable, and that every living being, human, animal, plant, is deserving of care and love, and that we are meant to be living more connected to one another. And we live in a deeply disconnected society. And that's because in many ways, I think the ego has just completely run amok. There's a lot of egos driving buses and cars and whatever they're driving without recognizing that there is a soul on board. And that soul is actually what we're meant to be living in connection with and living from and for. And as a result, the world is suffering. Individuals are suffering because they are feeling so disconnected. Relationships are disconnected. People are disconnected from one another. And people also are not seeing that they're connected and that everything is interconnected. And so they're harming other people. They're harming the land, all in service to their ego self. So the toxic individualist culture in which independence and power and wealth and traditional versions of success are revered is destroying us. And so I've seen that, and I felt it also within me. It destroys me internally when I'm not living connected to who I really am, to the truth of who I am in my soul. And so that's a constant practice for me. And the other thing that I want to mention that's a really important part of my journey is that I realized over time through a lot of therapy, a lot of coaching, a lot of self-inquiry, a lot of connection with spirit and writing, that the reason that I kept striving for that achievement was because I felt like I wasn't enough. And I knew that. I knew that inside me, that I was feeling that. I had been feeling that forever, it felt like. And I couldn't coach myself out of that. That wasn't a mind experience. That was an existential experience that I was having. And this is true for so many people that I've worked with as well. And what helped me with that is living from my soul self. Because my soul self knows so deeply, without a shadow of a doubt, that it is connected to and held in and loved by an unconditional source of love that is far beyond any experience of love that we've ever had. And I've learned that both through like internal knowing, some spiritual experiences that I've had where I've felt deeply cared for and I have felt that love. And also through the main teachings that I follow, which happen to be related to science and to people's near-death experiences and people's personal spiritual experiences, mysticism, and all of these different traditions that are about us being cared for and loved. And I think the deepest expression of disconnection is believing that we are not worthy and that we need to do something to be worthy. You do not need to do anything to be worthy. Our ego selves will run around and be human doings to try to achieve that. When the truth is that our soul selves know that we are worthy simply for being, simply for existing. We are just worthy. We don't even need to exist to be worthy. We just are. Our souls are worthy. We are worthy. Everything about us is worthy of that love, of belonging, of connection. And that has been a huge part of my journey. It is a constant practice to remember that, because I still dance with this. I dance with all of these things, with these experiences of disconnection and then connection. It's not one or the other. It is about them living together, the ego self and the soul self, and listening to that internal guidance, connecting with other people, and living from what your soul values, which I believe is connection and love, because love is connection and connection is love. So that's my story. It's a constant practice, but it's what matters to me. And every day I choose connection. I choose connection. I lead with connection. I put that at the forefront of my life. And I believe it saved me. And I believe it can save a lot of people. And I believe it can save the world potentially if we lived as a more connected society. So if any of this resonates, if my story resonates with you, if you feel like you're living this way already, if you want to live more this way, if your soul is yearning for connection, if your soul is yearning for being connected to something greater than itself, and is longing for belonging and worthiness and wholeness and love, then join me. call me. Reach out. I'd love to connect with you, and I'd love to connect you with the community of people who are also living a connected way. And I am here in this age of extreme disconnection. My hope and wish and prayer for you is that you are able to feel the light of connection and love, even amidst the most disconnected, dark times. May it be so, and so it is.